Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Performers of all types have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. By and large, live audiences are not allowed, which threatens the livelihoods of actors, musicians, and others. The pandemic has also laid bare how many people are a paycheck away from hunger or food insecurity. As we first told you last summer, 28 different musicians have come together to create a unique album that raises money for the Vermont Food Bank. One of the musicians is Frank Mills, who is known for this 1979 hit Music Box Dancer, which sold 6 million copies. Mills now lives in Stowe, and I spoke with him about his career and the effort to help hungry Vermonters. How did Music Box Dancer get its name?
Pretty simple, really. It didn't have a name for a long time. And even when we recorded it, you go into the studio, there's a producer and a recording tech guy, and he'll say, what's the title of the song? This is just for reference. You can say 10X, or you could say Happy Days, or whatever. He's just going to write it so that you know what's in the box when he gives it to you. And the drummer happened to have a woodzoo, which is a type of an instrument that only drummers would carry. It's like a gourd. Mm-hmm. And you scrape it along these ridges and it makes a scratchy sound, but it adds a nice little rhythmic effect to many songs. You hear them all the time, but nobody really knows what's playing back there. Anyway, he dropped his woodzoo and it broke into a million pieces on the floor. And when the producer said, all right, what are we going to call this song we've just recorded? I said, call it The Broken Woodzoo, because I don't have a name for it. But my daughter Nancy, and she was 4 or 5 years old at the time, bought me a little music box that she had with a little dancer that popped up when you opened the lid and spun around. I don't know what it was, one of Bach's little bourrées or some dance thing from the classics. And her arm was missing. So I thought, well, crazy glue, and we fixed that in a minute. But I was very attracted to this little dancer, and I thought, there's something about her that makes sense for this song. And I looked at it, and I looked at it, and I played with it, and I listened to it, and I thought, yeah, what is she? She's a music box dancer. And I thought, yeah, that's a different title. So there it is, and there it was, and there it shall ever shall be.
The story of this song is so remarkable because you created it in the early 70s, 73, 74. It was
Correct.
Released then on an album that did okay, but not like wildly. It was 5 years later when you released it on the B-side of a 45. So just briefly tell us that amazing story.
Well, there was that 4 or 5 year period of famine, let me assure you, and 3 kids. Oh, I drove taxis. I did everything that musicians do, to make ends meet. But secretly down inside, I felt that I had written some good music and that it deserved a chance. So I went to see Mike Hoppy at Polydor Records in Montreal and said to him, is there anything we can do with this? And he decided that the single would be released. There was evidence that The Poet and I, a song I had written, was getting a lot of airplay, and Music Box Dancer was getting a lot of airplay. Ironically, The Poet and I seemed to show up more than Music Box did. In 1979, I guess, 78 in Canada, Dave Watts, a friend of mine up at radio station CFRA, who I'd met with the Bells, which is a group of soft rock music. Mm-hmm. We had a #1 hit in 71 with a song called Stay a While, which I arranged and played piano and harmonica on, but that's another story. But David got the single, and I'd met him with the Bells. We'd had a couple of beers together, and he said, well, I can't play the A side. It's a tearful ballad. And he said, we're a rock station. This is a happy music song. He said, I will play the B side. And he threw it on just for fun, he tells me. And he phoned me. I remember getting a phone call in Montreal. I was just about to drive another taxi cab thing, and Dave said to me, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah, what's up? And he said, I just played Music Box Dancer. And he said, the switchboard has been jammed for 2 hours trying. People want to know what this is. And he said, I think you've got a monster on your hands. So then, of course, I had to get recordings that they could sell. They couldn't list it as being #1 with a bullet up in the radio station without some product. So I scrounged around as best I could, read as many albums as I could, and sent them up there. Unfortunately, we got the single out. The rest was history. It just was mind-boggling.
#1 in 26 countries,
Yeah,
Juno, Grammys, all kinds of
yeah,
awards all over the place.
yeah, it was fun.
Awesome.
It's been a great ride.
Just recently, you participated in a project to raise funds for the Vermont Food Bank in the
Right.
wake of increased need during COVID-19. Could you tell us a little bit more about that project?
Yeah, Jim Heights phoned me one day. Jim is really the brains behind the project, and I think he deserves most of the credit. And talking with him and chatting, we got to know each other a little bit. And I'm all for charities. I do the best I can, and any reasonable request is usually agreed upon. So I don't fight it. I enjoy it. Particularly in Vermont's case, we have such a cross section of people here. There's extremely wealthy people here, and there are extreme poverty here people. So any chance to help in that regard was an honor for me and an honor for my music. But I said to him, well, there's this song, it's just like Music Box, but it's modern.
Yeah.
It's done with, and I said, I think Shadows would be a good chance that, people might like it and download a little more often than they would without it. So that was the reasoning, and hopefully it will, because yes, I think the cause is excellent. Whatever we can do to help as musicians is great.
It's a pretty special album.
Well, thank you. And I think it's an opportunity that you don't get very often, to hear 28 different artists on one album. Where do you get that chance? And particularly all from Vermont. So, it's very heartwarming, I think. Yeah, it's a good project.
Frank Mills, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Been a pleasure, friend. Nice to meet you at last.
We extend a special thanks to Jim Heltz of Williston, who pulled the project together. Here's how you can find the album. Go to musictofeedthesoul/bandcamp.com. Our next segment focuses on pollinators, the birds, bats, bees, and butterflies that impact some 90% of all the flowering plants on the planet. Here's Keith Silva to tell us about pollinator research at the University of Vermont.
When it comes to bees, Charlie Nicholson knows how to catch a buzz.
That's our queen. Oh, she wants to get out.
Nicholson studies wild bees. And if you're wondering, aren't all bees wild? Nicholson says you can't be serious.
The bee that we all know and love, that honeybee, isn't actually a native wild bee. They can become wild just like we can have wild feral cats. But honeybees are like chickens or pigs or cows. They're part of our system of animal husbandry. Honeybee is just one bee. We've got over 275 different species of bees in Vermont. And we've seen almost a third of those species on these blueberry farms, which that blows me away, the diversity that we see on blueberry farms.
The blueberry bushes at Adams Berry Farm in Charlotte provide the perfect laboratory for Nicholson's research.
When I step on this farm, I can smell all that sweet blueberry nectar in the air. I immediately just start hearing bumblebees, boom, boom, going from one bush to another. Those are all wild queens that are living in the fields and the forests surrounding this farm. And they're taking this early spring trip every day from their nest to this just bonanza of pollen and nectar on this farm. And they're taking that pollen and nectar back to their nest to provision their young worker bumblebees to be. So when we talk about wild bees, a lot of those aren't necessarily these large colonies. It's a single solitary queen. A lone wolf she is, just moving through this landscape, collecting pollen and nectar to feed her young larvae back at home.
Nicholson received his PhD in natural resources from UVM in 2018. He began his research by asking what factors make a farm bee-friendly.
We looked at, okay, maybe it's the landscape around that farm. Is it surrounded by forests and meadows and wetlands? Or maybe it's what the farmer's doing on the farm. Are they organic or close to it? Or are they spraying lots of pesticides? And so what we found is, surprise, it's both of those things. And they work in sync, right? Such that if you're a low intense farm, right? You are maybe an organic farm and you're situated in a landscape with a lot of natural area, we see a lot more abundance and diversity of bees on those farms.
Low-input practices go further than promoting pollinator habitats. As Nicholson learned, an abundant bee population equals a better bottom line for the farmer.
We saw that farms with really active, healthy bee communities had yields that were larger, so their farms were producing more berries, but those berries themselves were consistently larger, and they were ripening a little bit earlier. So you had more consistently large berries getting to market a little bit early, and more of them, because those farms had this healthy, active, lively bee community.
With his work at UVM complete, Nicholson is starting his postdoctoral research at the University of California at Davis. As he leaves the Green Mountains for the California coast, Nicholson brings with him the knowledge of what it means to be a steward of the land.
In addition to having the joy of getting to watch and get to know all these beautiful organisms, these wild bees, dealing with Vermont farmers has been just another joy for me. They are an inspiration. They're up here super early, before the bees are, and they're out here super late. And they care so much about not only their farm, but the landscape around their farm and what their farm means to the other animals that live in these natural areas, but also what their farm means to their neighbors. That it isn't always just, about the bottom line, or it isn't always just about minimizing your impact to nature, right? That you have to balance those things always as a farmer. And I learned that here, and I'll take that with me wherever I go.
From the blueberry blossoms to the bees, and from the farmer to the researcher. This is a bee story that's an A everywhere you look. In Charlotte, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
And that's our program for today. Once again, thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.